Hello and welcome to the Spotlight with JW Riggs. Of course, I'm your host, JW Riggs. My guest today has worked with artists such as The Roots, Common, Elvis Costello, Prince, and he was also a member of Team Supreme for nearly a decade on one of my favorite podcasts, Questlove Supreme. So please welcome producer, radio personality, and music historian, Steve Mandel, better known as Sugar Steve. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm actually better known as my real name, Steve Mandel.
Okay.
But, well,
Sorry
the
about
truth
that.
no, you're good. That seems to be how you came across me, as Questlove
Yeah.
Supreme. Yeah. That moniker, Sugar Steve, is really, it's from Questlove Supreme. So now that I'm no longer on that podcast, I'm sort of phasing it out. But yeah, that I am lesser known as Sugar Steve, not better known.
Okay, I like that better. That actually sounds cool. So lesser known as Sugar Steve. So sounds good. So how are you doing today? Before we jump into any questions, I always like just making sure my guest is doing well and just seeing how they're doing, checking in with them.
Everything's cool. I'm at work. I'm at 30 Rock, preparing for a Tonight Show with Jimmy
So
Fallon,
cool.
where we work almost every week here, and that's sort of the day job. And I'm in our rehearsal room right now, where we've been for 17 years in this room, where the Roots rehearse and make music all day long. And that's where I'm at now. I'm simultaneously working on editing of a live show, or 6 live shows actually, that we did recently, a couple of years ago at this point, with Questlove and Ray Angry and David Murray, called Plum Pie, which was live at the Blue Note, and we recorded all the shows, and I'm currently editing it together, and we're going to be releasing that soon on one of my record labels called Cha, and hopefully in the next few months this should be out. But yeah, it's like 10 hours of music, so it's a lot to
So
work
cool.
on. So we have this studio here for the show, and we also get to use it for anything else outside the show. So like I said, I'm currently working on today's Tonight Show and this editing project.
That's really awesome. Well, I appreciate you being able to take time out of your very busy day and schedule to talk to me for a few minutes.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of college radio in general, and I have a show on WKCR at Columbia University here. I'm not an alumni there, but my partner on the show is an alumni there. And we've had a show for a number of years now called Labeled, where every episode's about a different record label, mostly jazz. And it's not like a set schedule, but it's approximately once a month we'll do a 5-hour show on a Sunday. And it's so much fun to be on college radio. I really envy you if you're how long have you been at your station?
I've been, let's see, I'm going into my 5th year, so I'll graduate in December. As soon as, 2022, 4 years, just about. As soon as I got to school, I was pestering the student manager at the time to be involved. And he was like, sure. He's like, really, no one's doing anything right now, but if you want to just go up there, play music, do whatever you want, go up there. So they just let me have free reign of stuff. I didn't really know what I was doing at first. Besides, I had some podcast experience, but that was it. And then someone who I now count as a great mentor of mine, Mr. Roger Holton, he found out I was up there, so he trained me on pretty much everything I know about radio. But after my freshman year, they asked me to be the student in charge, and that's really when our radio station kind of was reborn. We really started promoting and getting sponsors and doing what we needed to, so students would actually know, oh, Freed Hardman has a radio station. Because I ran into so many people who were like, we didn't know we had a radio station. Where's that? I'm like, well, it's in the main building. So it's just one of those things where people would walk by it not knowing, and now, and hopefully it's like this after I graduate as well, people know about the radio station, or at least they know some people are involved in it. They might not know what's going on necessarily, but it's also a really good connection to small town Tennessee, as it's in a town in between Nashville and Memphis. So it's little tiny Podunk, Tennessee, basically, Henderson, Tennessee. And that's how a lot of people get their news and stuff like that. If they don't want to get a station from Jackson, Tennessee, they'll listen to WFHU.
So before you went up into the station, what was playing on the airwaves? Just dead air, or was it like some computer playing?
It was some computer playing, and then there was some people who would have shows, but really no students. It was usually just there was a big band sound show, which we still have every Saturday and Sunday, and then we had gospel music. Since I go to a Christian school, we had gospel music going. We had big band sounds and jazz, and then some random contemporary here and there throughout the afternoons. So that's something we've really refined our schedule, where we have 90s at noon every weekday, and I have a show on Friday nights called Nashville Nights where we play country music. Since it's middle of nowhere Tennessee, that's what we should be playing. People like some of that stuff, so playing that. And then on Tuesday nights, probably one of my most proud accomplishments, we have a show called Late Line. It's basically a late night talk show. One of my friends who's part of the music department, he put together a 6-piece band where basically we stuff them into the studio. I do a monologue. It's basically what I like to call my own version of the Tonight Show. I grew up on the Tonight Show, so I'm like, being able to host something like that every Tuesday night for the last year or so during the school year has been really special to me. So,
Wow, that's sounds like you're doing a lot of, and that does sound like a college radio station playing all those different genres and doing all kind of free-form stuff. Good for you.
thank you, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was excited to talk about your involvement with college radio. So, let's talk about that show a little bit more, if you don't mind. Like, really, what was the inspiration behind that?
Well, me and my friend Jake, we own an all analog jazz record label, and we record everything all analog. The whole process is analog. There's no digital in any of the chain at any point. And we've been in business about, I don't know, 8 to 10 years, somewhere in there. We've put out about 25 vinyl records, and our stuff is streaming too, but we focus on the vinyl. And we've put out about 25, and then we more recently started a digital branch of that label called Cha, and it's mostly archival, and we've been putting out a lot of stuff from my history and from some of my friends and coworkers' history. A lot of stuff from the 90s, mostly rock, and a whole bunch of other eclectic types of things on that label. But the radio show is primarily based on the fact that we own this jazz label, this analog jazz label. And once we became a label, well, actually, the reason why we wanted to start a record label is because we were so into the history of jazz record labels specifically. And so my partner came up with the idea of doing a radio show at his old college about record labels, each episode, like I said, being about a different record label. And so it was his idea. It was his idea to start the label too, the JMI Recordings, it's called. And so both things have been really successful. Not necessarily financially, but so much joy and a feeling of accomplishment comes from every record we put out and every radio show we do. It's not just our passion, it's what really makes us feel fulfilled, is doing these records and doing those shows and other things like that. But you know the feeling. It's sort of this creative juice that you get from doing things that will last beyond you. So we're really happy about the way that the radio show. We have so many great partners over there at WKCR. They're celebrating their 85th anniversary coming up. So I would encourage anybody who doesn't know about that station to check them out. Yeah. It's really famous, very famous place, WKCR. So it's an honor for me to work there, especially not being an alumni. But yeah, the radio show it's usually 5 hours. Sometimes we do 3.5 hour shows on Friday mornings, and we've done about 54 episodes so far. And yeah, again, it's something we really look forward to each month when we do it.
I think that's great. I mean, something that you really touched on, and I feel the same way, is there's just something about media and music that just kind of clicks with me that I love it and it feels magical. It really, and I'm not saying that in a sarcastic way, it's going to last longer than us, which is really cool. It's just a little piece of us that could go on to the next generation, is how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's always been my inner thoughts about that is, you know, sort of this wrestling with immortality in a way. We all, I don't want to get morbid, and I don't know when you're going to play this show or what time of day. I don't want to depress people in the morning, but, you know, we all reach our end at some point.
Right.
And it is nice to think or to know that this piece of you can live on to hopefully inspire people in the future.
Yeah, like absolutely. I think that's great. It's one of those things where um, I've always loved media and stuff like that. So being able to just hopefully inspire someone else, even though I just have right now a small college radio show and a podcast, and but at the same time, like you never know who this is going to reach. Like someone in Ireland could be listening to this. Who knows if they actually are, but they could be. Like you never know who you're going to be able to reach and inspire, which is really just a special thing about media.
Absolutely. That's why I got into recording. I mean, my main job is an audio engineer, and my main
Right.
job within that is tracking or recording. And to me, that's always the bottom line is the records, the discography, and that's kind of telling your story of your life, you know. So
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that kind of leads us a little bit into our next question. So, how did you get into music and audio production? Did you grow up in a musical household? Really, what inspired you with that?
I did not grow up in a musical household. My parents had terrible taste in music. They were just a little too old to have caught the Beatles era. And so everything in our house was show tunes and just Muzak. It was just, you know, and some very light stuff, Johnny Mathis and Barry Manilow, and just my parents were not connoisseurs of music at that point, or at any point. My sister, however, was starting to buy like records and 45s, disco era stuff that was kind of my first exposure to cool music was coming from my sister's room. But then I became a bit of a record collector, and I think that's where my music education has come from. That's where my desire to do this for a living and as a hobby came from. Is I just found that records, and I mean songs too, but records in particular, albums, whatever you want to call them, were sort of, and collecting them, and you know, studying the liner notes and all those types of things was sort of how I really built this undying passion for music. And then after that, like around, I guess in high school, college, I started to write lyrics, and that's when I started to write songs and get into composition, and after that is when, once I had a whole bunch of songs written, I wanted to learn how to record them, and that's how I got into engineering. So, but the answer to your question is, it goes back to my sister and some disco 45s, and then just going to the record stores. You know, we used to really live in the record stores just to explore and get out of the house, and so that's kind of a big part of my upbringing, was just being in record stores.
That's great. Yeah, I've sadly only been to a few record stores because I mean, sadly in the area of Memphis I live in, there's not too many. I mean, there's mainly antique stores that people put as record stores, but They recently just put a record store in the mall, so that's
Oh
nice. I've
yeah,
been there a few times. So
they're coming back, man. Don't worry, they're
yeah,
coming back.
they're coming back. I mean, I started collecting, I would say, about 5, 6 years ago now, and now I have about 300 records. So that's just because I've made some good connections, and I find stuff for cheap that's in good quality, and so yeah. But I think it's really neat how sometimes you don't necessarily know it in the moment, but the people around you can inspire just your taste in music, and you'll think about it years later, similar to how you did with your sister.
Oh yeah, and definitely my friends also.
Yeah.
Have always turned me on to new artists and new types of music from the very beginning, still up until now.
Now, of course, we've talked about influences a little bit, but with some of the artists that you worked with, who have been your biggest influences, not only within music and the work world, but just within your personal life as well, if you don't mind digging into that a little bit.
Well, they were actually at first very far apart. The two things I think you're asking, my personal and
Hmm.
my professional. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
that was your question, but I'll
pretty
answer it
much.
as if it was. Um, when before I became an engineer and started working at Electric Lady Studios here in New York, where I ended up meeting so many of my professional influences like Questlove, D'Angelo, Pino Palladino, James Poyser, Common, Erica Badu, and the Roots, and everybody else from that scene, which used to be called neo soul, and of course hip hop. But the specific genre back then was called neo soul, and that was like D'Angelo and Badu, and so anyway, those all of those artists I had never heard of before in my entire life. Not a single one of them prior to when I started working at Electric Lady as an intern in like 1996. And I quickly learned who they all were, quickly somehow ended up working with them as an intern, and then as an assistant engineer, and then as an engineer. And so those artists, that whole group, which include even more artists on the peripheral, those became my professional connections, my influences. I got very deep into their music, and still to this day, some of those albums are such landmark albums for me and also for the world, like Voodoo by D'Angelo, and uh, Mama's Gun by Erica Badu, and Water for Chocolate by Common, and The Roots, Things Fall Apart, and so many of their other records. So I I somehow just fell into this slot where I had no business being, because like I said, I didn't know who any of them were. I wasn't really that into hip hop, or I wasn't. I mean, I had a deep knowledge and love for old soul music, and so I connected in that regard, because a lot of what they were doing did reflect a lot of vintage soul and stuff like that. So I was able to connect through my knowledge of like the history of that, but I wasn't hip to what was happening at that moment in those
Right.
genres, and I just accidentally ended up with them, and that's been just a 30-year education at this point in all of that type of music. And Questlove is one of the renowned historians
Yeah.
of music on the planet right now. So he's been teaching me for 30 years about everything he knows, and I've been teaching him about what I know, which is I'll take you now to the other half of your question, the personal
Yeah.
side of who are my influences on the personal side, which I was very privileged to be able to teach Questlove some of these things
Right.
along the way of what I knew. But my passions were rock and singer songwriter stuff, and a lot of Dylan, a lot of Bob Dylan, a lot of Beatles, a lot of Paul Simon, a lot of Lou Reed and Velvet Underground, and those types of artists. So I don't know where you group them genre wise, but a lot of and Elvis Costello. So a lot of rock from the 60s and 70s, and I grew up in the 80s, so a lot of pop from the 80s was very influential on me as well. And that's kind of, and I do dabble in stuff from the 50s, and obviously for jazz I listened to stuff that dates all the way back to the beginning of recorded music. But so it was a lot of rock and then a lot of jazz. And my jazz education has continued, obviously, to this day. It's an endless rabbit hole of history and just magic, as you put it, that in the jazz world, such an old form of music as well. I mean, based on the blues, which is even older. And so my personal influences mostly rock and jazz and pop, from the 80s, let's say.
Yeah.
So yeah, 60s, 70s, and 80s I would say is my favorite decades. And after that, I kind of fell off. Once I started working in music, I kind of stopped listening to music outside of what I was working on and what I was doing personally. I know that's kind of shallow in a way and a little bit, but like the blinders kind of helped me try and keep my own vision somewhat my own. Plus, I think rock and jazz kind of fell off in the 90s, so it was kind of hard to stay tuned into all that stuff. Not to say that there weren't great artists in the 90s, but my interest in popular music, or at that point I was like, if I'm going to find new music, I'm going back in time to find it. So
right.
That's. I hope that answers your question. Basically, my influences for work are. There's lots of crossover, but my influences for work are hip hop and soul music and whatever Questlove's working on at the moment, and then personally, it's a lot of rock and jazz.
I think that's great. And I somewhat relate to you on the fact of course, right now I'm going back and listening to a lot of older stuff. Because personally, I'm not a huge fan of some of the current music going on. There is some great stuff, but at the same time, I've always considered myself to prefer some of the older stuff. I'm a big soul fan. Al Green is probably one of my favorite artists. So it's like soul is big. Paul Simon's always been big in my household. My dad introduced me to Paul Simon when I was really young. Graceland is one of my favorite albums. So it's one of those things where it's mainly, if I'm not listening to 90s country, I'm listening to 60s and 70s soul and rock type of thing. So very diverse, but it all kind of goes together in my brain. So just a few more questions here. Of course, I would like to talk about Questlove Supreme a little bit, if you don't mind, and also just your friendship with Questlove. Do you mind kind of explaining how y'all met? As of course you spent almost a decade on Questlove Supreme, but you've known him long before then as well. So just kind of explain that for my audience a little bit.
All right. Well, like I said, I met him at Electric Lady in 1996, and that was just, I got it randomly assigned as an assistant engineer to the D'Angelo record Voodoo, and that was a very long session, many years. So we ended up, becoming, everyone on the session ended up becoming friends, obviously, and so that was the beginning of it. At some point, the Roots got built their own studios in Philadelphia and stopped coming to Electric Lady. And I'll keep the long story short, but I ended up moving down to Philly to continue to work with them. And then a few years later, we got the first version of this show here, Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, and Questlove, he essentially just invented a job for me here that didn't exist before, just so that I would have a job and a salary and benefits. And, he's super generous and super thoughtful in those regards. And it's very difficult, for people out there who are like, I want to be an engineer or I want to be in music. It's very hard to find a client like this. It's one in a million who's got enough work to keep you employed, who's, iconic at this point and just, very loyal, So it's hard to find a job in what I do with a client like this, where you're, the guy has taken care of me for 30 years. So there, and it's a friendship and it's also a brother thing, but it's also still a boss employee thing. Like my mindset is, the job comes first and, whatever else comes after that. So I've tried, it's hard. I try to maintain a friendship and a boss-employee relationship simultaneously. It can be, a minefield or, a little tricky. So there's that whole aspect of things. But it's been, we've been on this journey together for 30 years. I mean, the roots started in the early 90s, so I wasn't around from the very beginning. But I've been around for most of it. So it's been a real wonderful view watching him become what he's become. I mean, he was already pretty famous when I met him, but now he's like, Academy Award winning director and such. But in answering your question, around 10 years ago, he started the podcast, and he was, everyone says everyone's got a podcast, but he was one of the first, people doing it. He's always on the forefront of things like, he was on the forefront of social media and with OK Player and all kinds of stuff, but he was one of the first kind of big names to have his own podcast like that, and it became really successful. We won awards every year, and we traveled all around the country to so many different famous recording studios to record episodes over the years. I mean, that was one of the biggest benefits for me, was we would go on these road trips and we'd go to all these famous recording studios to record the episodes, and not just because we wanted for it to sound good in a nice studio, but we wanted to check out all these famous studios all over the place. So that was a great perk of that. And of course, you can tell when you listen to the show that the five of us were like this family, where it's just no holds barred, where we could tell it like it is, and really get down and dirty with the subject and with the guest. And I think that was the appeal for a lot of people, was just this very, you felt like you were sitting in the room with us because it was so casual,
Exactly.
But yeah, it was an incredible opportunity to meet hundreds. I don't know how many episodes we did, but just hundreds of famous people that I've always wanted to meet and ask questions. And it started. I was just the engineer like when we were starting the podcast. It was in this room where we did the first couple of test episodes, and I was recording it. It went on for hours, and then I would have to like edit it. And it was taking me so long. We ended up Quest was just like, grab a microphone. You can be on the panel. We'll hire an engineer, to do the technical stuff. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of what got me on the podcast was not only my sense of humor, but also this unwillingness to do the amount of work that was going to have to happen for the podcast to be successful on the technical side. But no, it ended up being just obviously another just incredible section of my journey with Quest, and it was fun. Like I actually became like semi-famous. People were stopping me on the street, like, "Are you Sugar Steve?" It's like, Yeah, I think I actually am Sugar Steve. You know.
That's cool.
But yeah, and I've gotten so many comments and compliments from folks like you about that, especially during COVID. It was like, really meaningful for people to have new episodes to listen to, and to our episodes are usually so long too. It's like it's a lot to digest, but it 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 was definitely rewarding for us, and I know it was also rewarding for the listeners. So.
Yeah. See, it was really rewarding. What I love about it is, of course, I listened to it some during COVID and I knew about it, but one of the deans at my college knew how much I love music and stuff. He was like, hey, you should listen to Questlove Supreme. It's a good show. Go ahead. And he goes, you're going to find stuff out about music that you've never even thought about before. And I did. I absolutely love it. And it's one of those things where I started to listen to it just kind of in the background when I was studying, and then I would catch myself paying more attention to that than what I was studying. So I'm like, okay, I need to do these separately. I'll find another podcast to study with. I'll just listen to this on my own. So I would set time aside pretty much every night before I went to bed, just kind of listen to an episode or half an episode, since they are a little longer, and then kind of and it's one of those things where I put other people onto the show, and even if they didn't necessarily listen to it, I would just tell them, oh, well, I found this out because of this, and it's just something that I absolutely love, and it's really grown my appreciation for music.
Yeah, I would encourage people who are doing podcasts or who are planning to do podcasts to make sure that you're live in the same room with the person you're interviewing. Now, during COVID, we had to go to Zoom like everything else. But then after COVID, we stayed on Zoom primarily. And that was kind of, to me, like the beginning of the end, if you will, of that
Right.
part of, Quest still has the podcast. He's just by himself now.
Right.
Check out the Questlove show. It's great. But the interviews were always so much more exciting and dynamic, and for obvious reasons, when you're in the same room with somebody. So if you're just going to be on Zoom, I don't know if I personally would tune in to your podcast. Like I definitely
Right.
I like the dynamic where people are with each other.
Now, like I understand, and I'm hoping after I graduate, I'm able to do more in-person interviews. As I've realized with the few in-person interviews I've been able to do, it's more. I'm trying to think of the word. It's more natural, honestly, and it just kind of feels electric being able to actually talk face to face with the person instead of doing it over Zoom, similar to what we're doing. But I still absolutely love this interview. It's just one of those things where it's like in person is just so much better.
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
opinion.
I wasn't referring to
Oh,
our interview.
no, you're good. I know,
was,
not at all. Yeah.
I was referring to Questlove Supreme. But
Yeah,
yeah,
of course.
thank you for asking about that podcast. It was definitely cool.
Yeah, now, just a few more things. For one thing, in a second, I'll ask you if you have any questions for me. I always like asking my guests that. But I know you probably get this question a lot. What was it like working with Prince? Were you able to really work with him directly? I know he was a pretty private person, so.
Yeah, it was really just a couple of times, a couple of sessions at Electric Lady. I'm not sure if he had never been there and he wanted to work there, or he had been there but he hadn't ever worked there. But it was for the album Joy Unto the Rave Fantastic. I don't remember the exact year, but I was just an assistant engineer on the session, but I was very much involved in the process of recording him, and he was there the whole time, and got to watch him play all the instruments and sing and everything like that. And the funny story, I guess, from that session was, well, I worked with two engineers. One of them, I guess, was the tracking engineer for this. His name's Hans Martin Booth, and he was Prince's engineer in Minneapolis also. He was like his current engineer, and so he came to Electric Lady and was recording, and I was assisting them in the studio. And then we did some mixes, and they hired this other engineer. I won't say his name, but he was kind of like this. a nice enough guy, but he was kind of, I don't want to use the wrong word, but he's kind of silly. Like, a lot of engineers spend most of the session trying to get you to hire them the next time, instead of being in the moment and just being, natural or authentic and just trying to like do your best. This guy was always sort of politicking subtly, or as subtly as he might have thought, to get the next gig from the client. And so I remember this one particular night, this dude was mixing, and so he was up at the console, and I was in the back of like one corner of the room on the left side, and Prince was in the back corner on the right side, just like 20 feet away from each other. And he's got like his current wife or his current girlfriend, like this super gorgeous person, like sitting on his knee, and he's dressed like Prince, like the whole thing. And I'm like sitting in the back corner. So this engineer is playing back his mix for us, really loud in the big speakers. And he's up at the console, and he's jumping and he's dancing and he's trying to emphasize how great the mix is with his body movements. And he's really trying to like get that next gig. He's trying to show Prince that this mix is a banger. But the problem is he's like this. He's kind of awkwardly shaped. He's like super short. Not that there's anything wrong with short. And he's super kind of like, he's kind of pudgy. Not that there's anything wrong with pudgy. I used to be short, and I'm still a little pudgy. But anyway, he's kind of short and pudgy, this guy. And he's doing these silly, and he's a terrible dancer too. So he's making a total fool of himself. So like, I'm like embarrassed, because like the studio recommended this guy as the mix engineer, and I'm like super embarrassed. I'm like, I can't even look at this guy. And so then I'm just praying that Prince is not seeing what I'm seeing, And so I look across the control room, across the back to Prince, and Prince looks at me and gives me one of these like, I can't. We're just on audio on the radio, right? So he's just shaking his head at me like, what is going on? Like, this is so pathetic, kind of a look, with his eyes and his head shaking, and he just gave me this the ultimate Prince, like, what is with this dude, And I just gave him the same thing back. I just shook my head like, brother, I do not know, like, I am so sorry for this, but. That's my Prince story, but it's miraculous, really. My name is inside of a Prince album in the credits. I still have to think about that sometimes,
Yeah, that's really awesome. Thank you for this. Like, I really needed this interview today. I think it's great. I just feel like this was a total like just conversation between two people, and that's really what interviews should feel like. I feel like I've had some interviews like this one where it's amazing, it just feels like a conversation, and I honestly forget that we're recording. And then others where I'm like, oh, we're totally recording. But no, thank you for this. Do you have any questions for me or anything like that?
Well, you mentioned you had a podcast. What's your podcast?
So, my current podcast, actually just started it last week. It's called The Spotlight with J.W. Riggs. I'm taking interviews like this and some other interviews that I've done over the last few years and uploading them. And really, yes, it's called The Spotlight, but it's also kind of about people who aren't necessarily in the spotlight. Like last year, I interviewed the guy who played Kermit the Frog for 30 years. And I'm like, yes, he's technically in the spotlight, but Kermit was the one in the spotlight, not necessarily him, and things like that. So, but during COVID, I had a podcast called This Podcast is Rigged, where I interviewed voice actors and just pretty much anybody I could interview. And it was one of those things where it was really great and it was a lot of fun. But I stopped that about 3 years ago during the writer's strike. It's just one of those things. It was difficult to really reach out to people. And also, I was getting busy with school. So I just kind of stopped that and laid that to rest. And like that's just kind of, to me, that's just a moment in time where I will always appreciate. But I'm done with This Podcast is Rigged. So I'm like, now I'm moving on to other things. mainly doing radio, but also doing the spotlight, and hopefully come January or so, I'm hoping to get a job in radio or somewhere within the music industry, and hopefully to continue podcast stuff as well. As some people are like, oh, just do podcasts, and I'm like, I feel like radio still has a place, and it has a place in my heart, so I'm going to continue to do radio as long as possible. So
That's a good, smart decision, because you can't play music on podcasts, but you can
No.
play music on radio.
exactly, and it's like that's how you reach people, really.
That is how you connect. That's what I'm trying to do after this is all done. I just want to be on the radio.
Yeah. It's radio's special. Radio's a really special place, and it's one of those things where everybody has a certain memory or connection that has to do with a radio. It could be just driving with their parents when they were younger, or the first time they heard their favorite Prince song, or something like that. Everything has to do with a radio. So
Everything has to do with the radio. You heard it, folks. J.W.
Yeah.
Riggs.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, and I hope to talk to you again soon, and thank you everybody for listening.
Bye-bye.